you need a middleman, a guy who's got the money and the connections in order to juice this deal in the background, while the U.S. government is covertly midwifing it, but publicly denying links to this. And this is the role. Now, Bruce Rappaport, there's a funny story. If you go back to the pipeline in high places, the high intrigue article, that I think the New York Times one that you had pulled up earlier, what you'll see there is a funny rundown of what ended up happening behind the scenes in this. Yeah, this one.
This is January 31st, 1988, pipeline deal intrigue.
Yeah. So what ends up happening here is, if you just go to by MEIS, Israel, the Central Intelligence Agency. If you run a search for overseas, you'll see there's something called the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Just overseas is one word.
Overseas in that article, Joe.
Yeah, in that article. Yeah, just Control F.
Yeah.
Okay.
That request prompted Bechtel to explore the idea of insurance with the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, a United States government agency that insures projects against political risks.
Yes. So this is a U.S., and I know it has the word corporation in it, but this is a U.S. government agency, a formal U.S. government agency. Sort of got corporation in the name because it's like USAID, but for contracts, for loans. And so in theory, the U.S. Treasury gets a cut of development work that's done. So today, in 2019, Trump actually changed the name of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. He merged it with another branch of USAID to create what's called the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, which is the successor to this, but it's the same entity. It should be noted that the Development Finance Corporation today is being staffed by the head of it is Ben Black. Ben Black is the son of Leon Black,
the $257 million financier of Epstein for the last 7 years of his life, attached to Apollo Global.
Yes, so you can see how these networks are the same today.
God damn it.
Yes, yeah. Leon Black paid $170 million to Epstein after the first conviction. And
they said that he's got some insane accusations against him too. Beyond that, involving some, impropriety doesn't even begin to describe.
Well, he was a big time Republican donor, VIP at Trump's inauguration.
Oh, and that's reassuring.
And his son is now the head of this same, this same unit that's been involved in all of these things for decades.
Why is Trump doing I try to look at this, Mike, and I don't want to skip ahead here. We'll come right back to what you're saying. But when you think of every possible thing that a very, very guilty person would do in a scenario of being confronted with some accusations, Trump is doing that, and his tracks are even showing that in like a comedic way almost, he has laid the foundation of just guilt back to this Epstein guy. So much so even that now he's having health problems out of nowhere. I've seen that a million times when people are guilty. It starts overtaking your body. What the fuck is he doing?
That's a longer conversation. I have a lot of thoughts on that.
I bet you do.
I feel like getting through some of the facts of this.
All right, let's do it.
Will make that discussion a little bit more productive. But if you want to pull this up, and this is going to get back to our USAID thing, if in a new tab, if you just pull up Ben Black, DFC, USAID. And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about how this is, Epstein is not dead. The past is not dead. It's not even the past. If you just go to Google and just type in Ben Black, Leon Black, USAID, DFC, and you'll see what I mean here.
I need to get Riz Verk back in here to talk about the simulation theory on this.
Yeah, if you just do that in a new tab.
Right, he's pulling it over. Leon Black's son looks to prove himself in Washington.
Go to Google. There's a very specific one that just type in Ben Black, Leon Black, DFC, USAID.
Boom.
Yeah, go down. Benjamin Black weighs shift in USAID funding. Try that one. There you go. What will become of USAID? Yeah, just put that in.
Archive IO it.
And what you'll see is, how I was saying we had to run it through these networks because there was no USAID, for Iran-Contra, right? We couldn't just give the Contras $2 billion in USAID funding because Congress passed the Bolin Amendment banning the USAID funds for
We
it.
had to drop it on the ground and just they picked it up.
Right, we had to run through these dark web networks,
Right.
and this is what I'm saying is it's the same. What happens now when you don't have USAID funding for all of our covert activity in Venezuela, in in Lebanon, in Ukraine? Well, welcome back to the Epstein network. So you'll see here what will become of USAID, and this is Ben Black, who is now the head of the the finance side of USAID rather than the grant side. And what you'll see is a lot of this portfolio is going to be moving into the same network that ran through Iran-Contra. And so getting back to what happened with the DFC in this Iran-Contra adjacent pipeline in '88 is the DFC at the time was told by the National Security Council to put up $400 million to back this Bechtel pipeline. And the DFC said, why are you telling us to do this? This guy, Bruce Rappaport, looks super shady. Because Bruce Rappaport had his own checkered past, just like Jeffrey Epstein did. And so the National Security Council said, don't ask questions. We deal with the national security. You put up the money, put up the money. And the DFC was running all these checks on Bruce Rappaport and saying, we don't want to put up $400 million for this super shady guy. So they queried the CIA and said, CIA, what files do you have? Do a name trace on Bruce Rappaport. We want to know this, whatever foreign intelligence you've collected on this, Swiss businessman with, ties to the Israeli defense sector. And the CIA produces basically like a limited hangout. What they do is they say, well, all we have on this guy are these public news clippings that we've collected over the years. But they hid from DFC that they had extensive dossiers on Bruce Rappaport and all of his dealings, their own dealings with Bruce Rappaport. And so even the government agency, now there was what they claimed is that Bruce Rappaport was not an asset. The same thing that Alex Acosta is reported to have said to the Justice Department in 2020, even though it seemed inconsistent with his reported statements in the Daily Beast. But again, we don't have the line of questions. Like Pam Bondi right now, could the Office of Professional Responsibility that did that 21-month investigation into Epstein and his intelligence ties between February 2019 and November 2021, that office reports directly to the Attorney General. So at that time, they were reporting directly to Bill Barr. Bill Barr was called by the New York Times the cover-up general for Iran-Contra. He was deeply...
Bill Barr was?
Yes, look this up. Look up cover-up general Bill Barr, Iran-Contra. I'm telling you, it all goes back to Iran-Contra. Bill Barr, remember, Donald Barr, Bill Barr's father, recruited
Dalton
Epstein to the Dalton School to be
Yep.
the math and physics teacher without a degree. Yeah, and you can look
Bill
up...
Barr is the master of covering up political scandals.
And look, yeah, and if you just search the term cover-up general, maybe if you just do, it might be in this article, but the Washington Post, I think, if you just do Google and just do cover-up general, I think they had it as a front-page story. Bill Barr started his career, so Donald Barr, Bill Barr's father, started his career in the CIA. It was the OSS at the time.
Yes.
Bill Barr told his high school guidance counselor his dream job was to be head of the CIA. This is in Bill Barr's autobiography, by the way. Then Bill Barr starts his career in the CIA. He works there for 6 years, and while he's getting his law degree. His first job is blocking congressional evidence about Iran-Contra. When Congress, the Democrats in Congress were trying to get a full archaeological dig on the CIA's involvement in Iran-Contra, Bill Barr was the liaison to Congress for the CIA, and he blocked it. He blocked the whole thing, and then he becomes Attorney General for George H.W. Bush, and then proceeds with all these pardons and blocking all the investigation into Iran-Contra in the early 1990s. This is why you had the Democrats, and that's why it took until the late 1990s and the John Deutsch and the Kerry reports and all this to actually get transparency on Iran-Contra, because Bill Barr had been blocking it from the Justice Department the whole time. But you have these direct links with Bill Barr and that very network because he was at the CIA during Iran-Contra. He blocked the investigation into CIA malfeasance during Iran-Contra. Epstein is running through Iran-Contra, through Southern Air Transport and through Adnan Khashoggi. And then Bill Barr is talk about putting the fox in charge of the hen house. Yeah. He's the attorney general that OPR has to report to and he's the one shaping the OPR report on whether Epstein belonged to intelligence. But the public, I think, has a right to see that transcript. What exactly did they ask Alex Acosta? Putting 4 words in quotes in a footnote, the 244th footnote, I don't believe that was the only question they asked Alex Acosta.
No way. And the way he answered it.
The way he answered it,
yeah.
I could see, if someone says the answer is no, I could see him saying, well, I was told that he belonged to intelligence, but I wasn't seeing any documents. How should I answer that? And then them saying, well, listen, if you didn't have firsthand knowledge, then you should say the answer is no. Okay? The answer is no. Great, perfect. Put that in the footnote, kill the scandal right there. We have a right to see that full transcript. Yes. What was asked, what wasn't asked. Because what wasn't asked will give you the key to what to ask now. Alex Acosta, I believe, is on the board of Newsmax now. Someone
Come on.
Yeah, look that up. Oh, here you go. Cover up General Bill Barr.
These people are like cockroaches. They never go away.
So here you see.
Is that what you want? Back in 1992, the first time Bill Barr was U.S. Attorney General, iconic New York Times writer William Safire referred to him as, quote, cover up General Barr, unquote, because of his role in burying evidence of then-President George H.W. Bush's involvement in Iraqgate, and Iran-Contra.
He got his career, he made his bones as the Iran-Contra guy who coordinated the CIA and DOJ side of Iran-Contra. And he became Trump's attorney general while Epsteined himself, or whatever happened in the missing 2 minutes and 53 seconds of the raw footage.
That they said was not doctored at all, as if we couldn't look at fucking metadata. I mean, Jesus Christ, man.
How long does it take you to open a door? Less than 2 minutes and 53 seconds.
Oh, my God.
But so he's the guy in charge of the Justice Department while Epstein dies in prison and while they bury the investigation.
And whose father gave Epstein his start because his father, after working at OSS, just decided, you know what, the most prestigious school for children in New York City, I think I'll go be the head of that because, you know, the people that send their kids there, at least I can talk with them like it's the old days, as if there's not something behind that. Of course there is.
Right, and it was Columbia before that, and Columbia in the 70s. And after he went to OSS, he went to Columbia. Columbia was where there was that first real merger between intelligence, academia, and philanthropy. You can look up...
Yeah, can you explain that?
Yeah, so in the in the late 1940s, the CIA only had, I think, 36 analysts studying Soviet...
and only 12 of them spoke Russian.
Right. And so what they did is they worked with the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, all the early foundations to pump up money into the university system. In fact, there's a great piece on this if you want to look it up. It's at the National Endowment of Humanities, I think. If you look up Philip Mosley, Cold War Organization Man.
Can Jimmy Wales stop asking me for fucking money? Just go to the CIA. They give you enough.
Yeah, well, he sort of does if you look at Jimmy Wales.
That's exactly. It's CIA-pedia. All right.
He's very close with James Clapper.
Yeah.
So this piece is we paid for this piece to be published. This is the National Endowment for Humanities, which is a government-funded endowment. And it's called How Philip Mosley Helped Soviet Studies Moderate American Policy. And so you'll see here, in 46, you see Iron Curtain descended over Europe. They only had about, 24 experts on the Soviet Union, and even 38 Soviet analysts, only 12 of whom spoke Russian. And so what they did is it's that same network. So Donald Barr went straight from the OSS to Columbia. And what they did is they pumped up these Columbia and Harvard Russian institutes. If you just run a Control F in this for intelligence. Yeah, and then go to the next hit.
Yeah, we got 5.
Yes, okay. So you'll see what happens here. So this guy, Philip Mosley, who's running the Sovietology department at Columbia, basically pioneers this nexus where Columbia University would serve as the long arm of the CIA for doing exchange programs with people in the Soviet Union, with bringing dissidents over, with getting copies of Soviet literature so that the CIA could analyze it. You'll see here, it says this sentence, sitting at the intersection of scholarship, intelligence, and philanthropy, Mosley created a field in which practitioners like himself could imagine, as Secretary of State William Rogers noted, no line between government and academic work. No line between the government and the universities. This is why I always say universities are not what they seem. There's no private market in higher education in America. Harvard was set to receive, when Trump was on the day of Trump's inauguration, Harvard was owed $9 billion from the federal government in grants.
It was that high?
Yes, look up Harvard, $9 billion.
Also, can we Google Harvard size of endowment? I forget the number off the top of my head.
Like $56 billion.
Right, so why the
yes.
fuck do they need that money?
Well, they invest in the very actions that they facilitate. What they get with this money is they serve as the long arm of the State Department, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the U.S. military for doing the sorts of work that the U.S. does not want formal fingerprints on. This is how you have the Harvard economists going in to shape the economic reforms of Russia in the 1990s. In fact, we should do a separate thing on that in a second. But even if you look up within this own article, if you just run a search for like CIA, you'll see that, like Philip Mosley, for example, or just like you'll see 25 mentions, but you'll see that he not only set up all these CIA fronts within Colombia, but he had So part of this was subsidized directly by the CIA. But you'll see that he even had how many different security clearances? If you go down a couple more, just hit the down button.
In security clearances.
Yeah, let's see. CIA financial case. So after the CIA's proposed Eurasian Institute failed, he ended up setting up a different one. But scroll down to CIA and Rand. CIA, boom. Yeah, here you go. Here are all the security clearances that this Columbia professor held here. National Security Council, CIA, State Department, Office of Naval Research. I think they have, 9 in total? And this is all to merge Columbia with the Central Intelligence Agency. Do you know what Hillary Clinton, where she's employed right now? She's employed by University of Columbia. They have something called... Where's Mike Pompeo right now?
Columbia?
The University of Columbia. The CIA director...
half of them's gone. I don't know if you've seen them lately.
Yeah, that's
true. That Ozempic's hitting, baby.
But, and so where's Victoria Nuland now? Where's she employed?
Oh, no.
The University of Columbia.
No.
And not only that, they're all at the exact same place.
God damn it.
Type in Columbia SIPA, S-I-P-A. This is the School of International Public Affairs. Look this up, and specifically within that, it's the Institute of Global Politics. But all of the major universities, if you want to make it big as a university, your biggest customer is not the students paying you $60K in tuition. It's the federal government, because you are running centers and institutes out of there that are helping a CIA operation or a State Department operation. Yeah, so this is the place. It's got Victoria Nuland, Hillary Clinton, Mike Pompeo, and a bunch of other CIA operatives on USAID payroll like Maria Ressa. But you can just type in Mike Pompeo, Hillary Clinton, Victoria Nuland. You'll see they're all there. They went straight from Victoria Nuland was the undersecretary for political affairs. That's the head of the political section. That's number 3 at the State Department. The JFK files showed. Yes, here you go. So Columbia
That's an old
SIPA.
shot of him, though.
Yeah, it's true. Yes, he's,
There's a lot of
less
Papa
pixels
Johns
now.
ago.
But they're all there. The Victoria Nuland ran the CIA side of the State Department. Arthur Schlesinger in 1961, in his 15-page memo to JFK, he was the senior White House advisor to JFK. JFK gets in 61. They immediately have a problem with the CIA. Bay of Pigs, all the Cuba stuff. JFK wanted to go on a different foreign policy track. His top advisor writes him a 15-page memo. This all got declassified in March with the JFK files. It's an incredible memo, and it's called, the title of it is called CIA Reorganization. And what Schlesinger says to JFK is, if we don't reorganize the CIA, you will not be able to administer U.S. foreign policy, because the State Department is being co-opted by the CIA. And one of the ways they do this is by control of the political affairs branch of the State Department. So I was in the Economic Bureau for State. That's, things around trade. We have another bureau for political affairs. And this has to do with the domestic political affairs in a foreign country. So every embassy will have a political section. The political section is actually the most powerful section in every embassy. The head of the political section for any embassy acts as the charge d'affaires when the head of the embassy is out. So the ranking order is U.S. ambassador, then deputy, and then head of political affairs. Now, what Schlesinger told JFK in this memo in '61 was that on the day of JFK's inauguration, 48% of all State Department, quote, employees in the political section were not actually State Department employees at all. They were CIA under diplomatic cover. And so while they were parked at a U.S. embassy, they did not answer in the chain of command within the State Department. They were covert operatives for organized political warfare being carried out by the CIA. But because they dominated the political section of the State Department, they could set their own political policy for the country. If the State Department did not want to overthrow that regime, but the political section wanted, the CIA did, then the CIA could simply use the bandwidth of the political section of the embassy to make contact with the various dissident groups, to run money to them, to help them logistically, to connect them, and run a parallel operation without it observing the typical White House National Security Council chain of command. And he gave examples where he said in some embassies, 80% of the political affairs staff are CIA, not even State Department at all. In fact, who was Joe Biden's CIA director? Bill Burns. What was Bill Burns before he became head of the CIA?
A buddy of Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, yes. In the 1990s, Bill Burns was the head of the political section for the U.S. Embassy in Russia, in Moscow. So he ran the CIA. Bill Burns, we're told, never worked a day at the CIA in his whole life before he was handed the reins to be the CIA director. Right? He was a State Department guy the whole time. But where was he at State? He was the head of the political affairs section for Russia in the 1990s when we were running the whole Harvard operation, which we should get to after this. But the second part of this,
I don't know where to go with this guy, bro. It's like just 4 trains at any one time.
But then Bill Burns was the head of the entire political affairs branch of the State Department before he became Deputy Secretary of State. But he ran the CIA side of the State Department until 2014, when he then met with Epstein 3 times when he went on to run the Carnegie Endowment, which again puts Epstein right there. How's Epstein, while he's working out deals with Ehud Barak, this is right at the time of the Carbine investments and all this, he's simultaneously meeting
all post-conviction, by the way.
Right, all post-conviction, and being funded by Leon Black at the time. But he's meeting with the guy who ran the entire CIA side of the State Department, who's then presumably meeting with Epstein to get funding for the Carnegie Endowment. I don't think Bill Burns was participating in trafficking or necessarily, I don't think he was going to Epstein for girls. He went to his...
that's reassuring.
What I'm saying is you go to Epstein for money. You tap into the donor network around Epstein. But who was the Undersecretary for Political Affairs while Bill Burns at State, while Bill Burns was CIA director? It was Victoria Nuland. And now Victoria Nuland is at Columbia, where they merged the intelligence world with academia and outside funding from the foundations. And that's where Donald Barr went right after the OSS. Right as the CIA was pumping up Columbia, he goes right to Columbia and then to the Dalton School where they recruit Epstein. But on the Harvard thing, there's a great, if you go to The Nation, if you go to Google and you type in The Nation, the Harvard Boys Do Russia, the article is called. And this is a great example of like how this works.
That's a great title.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And there's a million pieces on this, even in the Harvard Crimson.
They got Harvard on Harvard crime.
Yeah.
Good for them. All right.
Yeah.
Nice work, Crimson.
Yeah.
The Harvard Boys Do Russia. After 7 years of economic quote-unquote reform financed by billions of dollars in the U.S. This is, when is this from, Deef? 1998?
Yeah. So we were privatizing Russia at the time. Russia threw up the white flag, in 90, 91.
Yep.
Yeltsin basically puts his whole trust in the U.S. government to make Russia a small L liberal Western democracy and to privatize the trillions of dollars in state-held assets. The entire Soviet Union, was basically under a communist government structure. It was all held publicly.
Yep.
So it's being sold off to Wall Street in London, and it's being done by Harvard University by way of USAID. So type in, for example, Harvard Institute.
Was Larry Summers involved with this?
Yes, Larry Summers and Jeffrey
Always
Sachs.
is.
So Chubais was basically the U.S. aligned oligarch that we ran through much. This is Anatoly Chubais, a darling of U.S. and Western financial establishments. He was the oligarch that we, in addition to a few other folks that we can get to, that we ran the Harvard USAID CIA op through here in order to privatize Russia's economy and sell it off to Harvard University and George Soros. So essential to the not even joking. Essential to the implementation of Chubais' policies were the enthusiastic support of the Clinton administration, and who was, remember, 1998, Ehud Barak is the prime minister of Israel. Jeffrey Epstein is visiting the Clinton White House 17 times, and you have this whole sort of Russia. We'll get to that in a sec. So, and its key representative for foreign economic assistance in Moscow, the Harvard Institute for International Development. Okay, so this was who the Clinton White House was deputizing to go into Russia and get them to privatize and set up legal and economic reforms that the State Department wanted. We tapped the Harvard Institute of International Development to do that. Now, if that name sounds familiar, what does the AID sound for? What does the AID stand for in USAID? It's the U.S. Agency for International Development. Yeah. This is Harvard's version of it, the Harvard Institute for International Development.
Institute, agency, same shit, different
and in
word.
fact, they were funded by USAID to do this.
Oh, I love that.
This is how the waterfall, this is how the structure is, right? So the Harvard Institute for International Development, using the prestige of Harvard's names and connections in the admin, Harvard Institute of International Development officials acquired virtual carte blanche over the U.S. economic aid program to Russia with minimal oversight by the government agencies involved. This is how you have plausible deniability, minimal oversight. With this access and their close alliance with Chubais and his circle, they allegedly profited on the side, and we'll get to how this happened. Yet few Americans are aware of the Harvard Institute of International Development's role in Russian privatization and its role in taxpayer funds. Now, before we get to this next section, let me do a little bit of world building here. Okay, so you're going to see that this is the U.S.-Russian Investment Symposium at Harvard's Kennedy School. Where was Epstein most active within Harvard? Go to Google, pull up a Google image of Jeffrey Epstein, Harvard.
Alan Dershowitz's office?
Well, the Harvard Kennedy School in particular. He gave millions of dollars through the Wexner Foundation, specifically to the Harvard Kennedy Center. The Harvard Kennedy Center is what is used to do government reforms. Yes, so these are millions of dollars that Epstein gave to the Harvard Kennedy School. In fact, if you want to know another really fun thing on this, type in, pull up a new tab and go to New York Post. New York Post, Gary Kasparov, Sudan.
Kasparov with a K.
Yeah, with a K. Sudan, Harvard.
It's going to be good enough.
Yeah, there you go. James Fiuku. Is this the... Okay, we'll pull up that first one.
Why is it pulling up all the SBF stuff?
Okay, here you go. All right, so look at this.
Wall Street Titan.
Yeah, no,
wait, go back to that.
That's the
Go
one.
back to that,
yeah, okay.
All right. Wall Street Titan, who hired SBF, defrauded into spending $7 million on AK-47s, grenades for South Sudan coup plot.
Let's talk about this. All right. So
the suit's coming off. Shit's getting real.
So this is super, super recent, okay? And we're going to come back to the Russia story in a sec, Russia and Harvard, because actually, one more thing before I talk about this. I'm sorry, one more tab. Penny Pritzker, Harvard Corporation. Who's running Harvard right now? Penny Pritzker, Harvard Corporation, and then you can see that, you can just, if you pull that up right now, just so everyone can see that I'm not making this up. So she is currently running the Harvard Corporation, the hedge fund on top of Harvard University. Now,
the hedge fund.
Yes. Now, yes, because that's the endowment. They wash this all through. They invest in hedge fund and private equity and alternative asset funds. That's how they make the money on their $56 billion endowment. So now type Penny Pritzker, Ukraine reconstruction, because I want to connect this so it's not ancient history. I'm going to show you how Harvard is doing today what Harvard was doing in the 1990s running the same operation. So Penny Pritzker, while she was the head of the Harvard Corporation, running the investments of the Harvard Management Fund, was simultaneously serving as the U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine's economic recovery, starting in September 2023. This is the same thing Harvard was doing to make billions of dollars for the Harvard Endowment in Russia.
Yeah.
So I just want to pull that up so that when we go back to to put the button on the Harvard Kennedy School, go back to that one right there. So here's what happened. We again have this Russia and Harvard for CIA covert action. So what happened here was you have this co-founder of Jane Street, which is this major Wall Street trading firm.
Where SBF got his start.
Right, where SBF got his start. And what you'll see here is by way of Garry Kasparov was
the chess player.
Well, the chess player who became the CIA State Department-backed opposition figure in Russia in the early 2000s. They ran him for president. He became the head of all of these, USAID, NGOs in Russia. He was an early Putin dissident in the early 2000s, using the clout of his international fame. Now he's been living in New York, I think, for the past decade and some. But what you'll see here is this was an operation to run guns to Sudan. And what happened was these, so if you scroll down, I'm going to walk you through this. Okay, so you have Granieri, 53, allegedly provided $7 million in two payments after meeting with Ajak at a Midtown Manhattan condominium.
In 2024.
Yes, and that his financing was vital to the plan. And if you scroll down, I'll say, okay, so he's a longtime supporter of human rights causes, and he thought that he was just paying for human rights affairs in Sudan. So if you scroll down, the case also references chess champion Garry Kasparov, though he's not named as a defendant in a wrongdoing. Ajak, a former child soldier in Sudan, who resettled in the U.S. and studied at Harvard's Kennedy School and worked as a World Bank economist before becoming a South Sudanese opposition activist. He and Keach, the other guy from Harvard Kennedy School who get rolled up in this, met with an undercover agent and for weapons in a Phoenix warehouse. And if you scroll down one more time, this is where your aid money is buying. So defense attorneys allege U.S. authorities were aware of the plan, citing a public authority defense and claiming the State Department told Ajak in October 2023 it would not support a non-democratic regime change. They accused, so basically they say the financing was allegedly arranged through meetings, including at Paul Weiss, go down one more.
The law firm.
Yes, and what you'll see is basically these two, the financier, the outside financier, and if you scroll down to the Kasparov reference, you'll see, basically Kasparov is also at the Harvard Kennedy School, where he's been running these anti-Putin ops for about 20 years now. He'd been working with the Kennedy School since the early 2000s. And so Kasparov introduces these two, Sudanese opposition activists who are also getting, fellows getting paid by the Harvard Kennedy School to work with this outside financier to get money for guns so that Sudanese rebels can use them, presumably, to kill Russians in the area, or at least Russian-backed rebel groups, because right now we're in a proxy war with Russia over much of Africa. A bunch of these U.S. and French-backed governments in Africa have been toppled by what are seen as Russian coups. We give money and arms to groups in Niger and Chad and Cote d'Ivoire and Sudan. Russia is making a play for those same minerals and those same natural resources, and so they back rebel groups as well. And so we need to run guns to the Sahel is the big belt in Africa that this runs through. So we're doing sort of Iran-Contra for Sudanese and Ivory Coast and Niger rebel groups.
Is that how you say it? Niger?
Yeah.
I'm always so afraid to say it. I just point to that one on the map.
Keep it safe.
That one, yeah.
But it's running through Harvard University here. And so back to what Harvard was doing in the 1990s, if you go back to that first article we were on.
Joe's been cooking today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a lot of tabs right now.
It's the Harvard Boys Do Russia one. There you go. Okay. So you'll see that Harvard was running the economic aid, and because of this, you couldn't FOIA them. They're because it's run.
You couldn't FOIA them?
Well, they're not a government agency.
Oh, that's right.
This is how
Shell company, basically.
Right. This is exactly how CISA at DHS structured the censorship work. They said, "Oh, well, we're hiring Stanford University to to do this work, and you can't. They're private universities, so you can't get the public documents unless they're subpoenaed by Congress or come out in a lawsuit." But you see what happens here is if you go to USAID in this, you'll see what happened was USAID then funds the Harvard Institute for International Development to do this. So you have the U.S. government paying Harvard to advance U.S. government causes, and what does Harvard get out of it? Well, type in Soros. Just Control F for Soros here. Okay, so here's what happened. In 1995, Chubais, that's the U.S.-friendly Russian oligarch, organized insider auctions of prime national properties. The Harvard Management Company, which invests the university's endowment, and billionaire speculator George Soros were the only foreign entities allowed to participate. The Harvard Management Company and Soros became significant shareholders in Russia's second largest steel mill, as well as in Sudan Oil, whose reserves exceed those of Mobil. This is ExxonMobil. Harvard Management Corporation and Soros also invested in Russia's high-yield IMF subsidized, domestic bond market. So basically, these are insider auctions. Harvard gets paid by the government to do this, and then they get first pick. They get insider trading on the very CIA, USAID ops they're tasked to do. This is the business model of Harvard. This is why people say that Harvard is a hedge fund with a university attached, because they are insiders. They're on the ground. They're the ones who are using the backing of the U.S. government to coerce foreign leaders to make economic changes to their entire industrial structure, and then they get close hold, insider, no competition bids on the very assets that they are commanding foreign governments to privatize. They ran the same operation in Ukraine. And Soros, who also, through the Open Society, and you'll see USAID is there too if you look at the bottom. According to Williamson, the U.S. assistance program in Russia was rife with such conflicts of interest involving the Harvard Institute of International Development and their USAID-funded Chubais allies. Harvard Management Corporation managers favored Russian bankers, Soros, and insider expatriates working in Russia's nascent markets.
Now, obviously, it didn't work out, and a lot of the players that got involved with this are straight up corrupt, and the ways that it was set up, I would argue, are straight up corrupt, and I'm not sure there's any good evidence against that. At the front end of it, though, before they made all those mistakes to do that, do you think that when a quote-unquote enemy like the Soviet Union topples after whatever it was, like 70 years, 75 years in 91, do you think that there is a use for something like a USAID, or not even USAID, just like the U.S. government to have some form of trying to get soft power over there to ensure that the next regime is better than the last, which obviously they failed miserably at. But the idea of doing something like that might make sense.
Yeah, I don't even fight that battle.
Yeah.
I totally see both sides of it. I think different schools of foreign policy thought, everyone's got a reasonable position on this in terms of the role of covert action versus, if you don't do it, you see the territory to Russia, China, the like. The issue is in order to get around the handcuffs that are put on the intelligence agencies, they end up co-opting outside institutions who we do business with. We are paying $9 billion to Harvard University until Trump just put them through the ringer with a lot of these cuts. $9 billion of our tax money goes to Harvard, and that's not so that Harvard can, research the impact of climate change on squirrels. They are an arm of the CIA, and what happens when you become so, because they always call this the third option, right? You don't want to go to war with the country, but you don't want to leave it alone entirely. So covert action is like the third option. We're in there, we're influencing things, but we're not committing huge amounts of money, but we're in the game secretly. And the problem is in order to structure that covert action so that it doesn't have U.S. government fingerprints, and because the CIA, does not really do these proprietaries anymore, you end up having to use other pieces on the chessboard that we all know and interact with, whether that's the unions, like the AFL-CIO, the biggest union in America, which has been, the union arm of the CIA since the 1950s.
The union arm of the CIA. You started to talk about this last time.
Yeah.
But can you expand upon that?
Well, it used to be called the AFL-CIA.
Yeah.
Yeah. So unions are muscle. They're street muscle. They also control logistics. They control the ports. They control the trucks. They control, the roads. If we want to get this happened while I was at State, Belarus. In Belarus, in the summer of 2020, we tried to run a regime change operation against Lukashenko, who was, the head, called the last dictator of Europe is what we always called him. Belarus was very closely aligned with Russia. How did we run the attempted color revolution against Lukashenko in 2020? We went straight to the unions. We went to the National Endowment for Democracy's Solidarity Center. That's named after the Solidarity movement in Poland, which was the union workers group in Poland under Lech Walesa that toppled the Soviet government during the Cold War. And, this has all come out declassified. The CIA was running black duffel bags of cash to the Solidarity movement. That was a CIA-funded union group, union movement. It relies on masses of workers taking to the streets, and because the unions are how industry is effectuated through labor, if the unions all agree to walk out and boycott, then the whole country shuts down. Well, our strategy whenever we are trying to do a bottom-up revolution, as opposed to a top-down military coup, if we do a people-powered color revolution, is to get masses of people to take to the street, shut down the roads, shut down the industry, so there's nothing for the dictator to weaponize. They can't, there's no economy pumping into the country because nobody's getting paid. The hospitals aren't working because the hospital workers have all run out. The schools aren't working because the teachers' unions have all walked out. There's no oil in the country because all the oil workers have all walked out. There's no mining in the country because all the mining workers have all walked out. And so the whole country shuts down. Now there's no money to pay the police. There's no money to pay the military. And so you can't even pay for people to contain the riots because there's no more capital for the dictator to use, while these same union groups are surrounding the Parliament building and throwing Molotov cocktails in police cars in a peaceful protest.
Very peaceful.
Right. So we use, the union stuff really grew out of, before it was really taken over in large part by the intelligence and military sphere, there was a very robust community organizing apparatus in the early 1900s through the 1920s with union groups. And it was, you had this labor versus management. And in order to stop that, you needed a counter union force that would go in and break up those protests, that would have its own. This is how you get involvement with organized crime groups. And you have the CIA moving through these unions for right-wing Cold War activity. And this
Fast forward to the 90s.
Right, in the 1950s. And by the way, note, where was Alex Acosta? What was his position in the Trump cabinet?
Labor.
Yeah, labor is the unions. It's the Department of Labor is who funds all of the. We have an international affairs branch of the Department of Labor, and they give tens of millions of dollars to AFL-CIO affiliates so that their branch in Belarus will take to the streets. Their branch in Brazil will help the Workers' Party leader there, I'll just say. And in Germany, you can look this up. This came out in the JFK files, the fully declassified version of this, but even look at the teachers' unions. So Randy Weingarten, who's the head of the American Federation of Teachers, what was she doing in Ukraine, a dozen times during the... Look up Randy Weingarten in Ukraine.
When was she in Ukraine?
Oh, 2022, 2023, 2024. When we took over Ukraine in 2014, one of the first things we made Yatsenyuk do is turn over the Ministry of Education to an EU credentialing body.
And we sent Randy over there to give a little consultation.
Now look this up. look up CIA. I think start with $1 million to the National Education Association. There you go. The first one on CIA.gov.
This one?
Yeah. Now this is just one alone. So this is in 67. You'll see. Now the National Education Association, and so there were two groups that got $1 million through this, but this is just through this one op alone. So a couple things. The World Confederation of Organizations of the Teaching Profession was funded by a CIA proprietary fund called the Vernon Fund, and this all got busted. The Vernon Fund was a sort of George Bush family adjacent Houston CIA oil mafia ring. And during the Cold War, we wanted to make sure that the educational materials that were taught in schools around the world tilted towards pro-U.S. rather than pro-communist education. And at the time, there was a threat perceived that communist and Marxist groups were infiltrating the schools. And so in order to make sure that the teachers' unions were successful in winning sort of pro-U.S., pro-capitalist teaching materials, we needed to capacity build our teachers' unions in order to make sure that the teaching materials and the policy and the personnel around major teaching umbrella groups were pro-U.S., pro-capitalist, etc. Yeah. Now, the National Education Association, who got $1 million, again, this is directly from CIA at the time, that's the biggest teachers' union umbrella group in the entire country. The AFL-CIO is the biggest union group in the country. These are not, Harvard University is the most prestigious university with the largest endowment in the entire country. You are not instrumentalizing small private charter planes like Southern Air Transport in doing this. You are fundamentally changing the relationship that everyday Americans have with the most salient and visible institutions in their own society when you run covert action this way. But because they are the biggest, they have the most reach, they have the most contacts, they have the most pull. So there's a natural temptation to do this. But what it ends up doing is creating this giant schizophrenia in the American mind, where people sense something is off about Harvard. Something is off about the unions, which are not representing the interests of the rank and file. There's this mysterious leadership class that seems to drive around in $1 million sports cars, and nobody knows what they do. But this is because because covert action is supposed to be, initially, it was supposed to sort of be a weapon of last resort if there was no other way to...
Oh, that went out the window right away.
It did. It did. But this was the idea was that we would create this capacity even if we didn't need to use it in case a regime really went south. But what it ended up becoming was just totally commonplace. And now, whether it's our tech companies or our teachers' unions or our random university X, I mean, it's all the way down to the most... From the major, you can't find a major university who's not wrapped up in this, whether it's Harvard or MIT or Stanford, all the way down to Florida International University, where Alex Acosta was the dean of the law school, which is now hosting the same way that Columbia has Mike Pompeo and Victoria Nuland and Hillary Clinton. Florida International University, which was its law school, is run by Alex Acosta, the Epstein prosecutor. They now host Juan Guaido, who's teaching there. Marina Corina Machado runs the democracy thing. We have blended our above board institutions with this covert action apparatus, and now you can't even reform the institutions without stepping on a CIA rattlesnake.
All right, hold on one second. Let's back that up. I don't disagree with that point, especially at the highest level institutions. When you look across all colleges, which I think we can all agree have a lot of problems right now, that's a whole other rabbit hole. A guy like Acosta, not the best guy to bring in, obviously, just because of what we've seen painted on his resume vis-a-vis this whole Epstein thing. That said, big name, draw for the university. He then naturally is going to bring in a few other people that also maybe have some stains on their resume that you mentioned that you don't want to have in there. Nonetheless, if that's like 4 names right there at a place that has 350 legit professors, I'm making up numbers right here, but if it's something like that, I would say those things can be a little bit more accidental collateral damage with poor oversight, because universities are trying to get people, as opposed to like primary school and high school and stuff like that. In universities, they are really trying to get people who have, instead of taking a career just as a teacher, who have also accomplished many things in the world themselves, only to come back to kind of teach those experiences. So they're going to naturally, therefore, just like any other company hiring people, going to run into some hires where, you know, ooh, in hindsight 2020, we shouldn't have made that one.
Right.
That's fair to, is that fair to say across a lot of these places, as opposed to where that is a way higher percentage of the time, it would seem like, when you look at like a Harvard, a Columbia, a Yale and stuff like that?
Yeah, I can totally see that. And again, FIU, Florida International University, is well positioned for that sort of thing because they're in Miami. I used to live right next to it pretty much. It's, you know, that you have all these exchange students, you have all these touch points with the whole Operation Mongoose, you know, region. And so it's a natural place to synergize that type of work. The issue is what happens. I don't know that I have a problem if it's genuinely in U.S. interests, you know, with the pre-2016 work. In theory, you know, at least you can make a colorable defense of it. But what happened in 2016 is all of these same networks began weaponized against the person and the movement that democratically elected the U.S. government. They went from weaponizing this against foreign communism to domestic populism. They argued that just like communism is a threat to democracy, because, you know, it inverts all of the civil liberties and freedoms and economic, you know, liberalization that is possible under American capitalism. They argued that populism was a threat to democracy, and so they used these same networks. Look at what these institutions are doing now. Look at what the National Education Association is doing now. They're if you just go to X and you just look at, they just passed a whole web of resolutions that they would resist Trump on every front, that they would not cooperate, you know, with his ICE policy on illegal immigration and the like. You look at what AFL-CIO is doing now. They're sponsoring riots. The AFL-CIO had a secret agreement with the Chamber of Commerce to shut down D.C. if Trump won the election in 2020. The AFL-CIO makes more money in government grants than they do in members' dues. They get like $72 million in grants from the federal government. They only get like $68 million or so from dues. They are funded more by taxpayers than they are by their own, you know, revenue stream. You know, so what happens when you have a government that the people democratically vote for? Yeah, and you'll see, like, you know, there's dozens of these. You have a problem where our biggest institutions are dependent on this government money to keep going. But we have conflated them. When it became okay as an op to target Trumpism the same way they targeted communism, by arguing that populism is a threat to democracy, anything that undermines our institutions, weakens American democracy. But then these institutions are serving as the scope of the CIA rifle. Then you have a covert society almost that is totally usurping the democratic will of voters. And then you end up having to destroy our own institutions in order to you have to destroy our own institutions in order to reform them. And you destroy Harvard University, you destroy our unions, you destroy our healthcare system who gets billions of dollars in USAID. Then you make the argument, well, now China is going to step into the void of that. Harvard is, what do you do if you're Harvard and you have $9 billion in grants that's a huge proportion of which is to advance some international agenda, whether that's on the energy sphere and the green energy transition, whether that's on seizing Eurasia and all the CIA work in Ukraine and Russia. And you've got the Harvard Endowment, who's made all these illiquid investments through their alternative asset funds in Ukraine reconstruction, because Penny Pritzker is simultaneously the head of Ukraine reconstruction and the head of the Harvard Corporation. They can't just turn that Titanic without decimating their own business model.
Yes.
And so because this has become so wrapped up in statecraft, what happens if the people vote for a different vision of statecraft? Either these institutions have to either that entire CIA State Department iceberg has to agree to surrender, and all these investments go to zero because now their business model is dependent on it, or we have to crush them as the federal government because you can't subsidize the thing that is destroying your entire operational policy.
It's like a gambler that gets way too far into a hand, right? Like maybe at the tip of the spear here, when some of these patterns formed, I'll even go all the way back at the beginning of CIA, and they're like, wait, we're really worried the Russians are going to drop a nuke on us. So they therefore then give that final potential end result of as the reason to say, like, yeah, you know, we'll color outside the lines a little bit, and it's a slippery slope. You keep going farther and farther and farther until now the shrub has grown so big that, like, you can't cut it down. You got to burn the whole fucking forest down. And that's where it gets weird, because you and I had this conversation last time, even with something like USAID. You've said it. And people criticize you for saying this, which is hilarious. You're like, listen, I'm calling out all the horrible shit they did and all the illegal shit they did and all the fucking shell company shit they did for CIA, but I'm not saying that every fucking thing they did was bad. But the problem is now people hear all these bad things, and I get it. People out there are like, good, burn the whole thing down. And it's like, how do we get that pendulum back to where, you know, as much as we may not like government bureaucracy, the parts of it that are supposed to be organizationally functional have the ability to function. I mean, shit, if I had the answer to that, you and I wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Well, you have to break the halo. This has been my strategy on this, which is you have to break the angelic halo over the thing that prevents any inquiry into it.
Yeah.
You can't motivate Congress to subpoena these guys. You can't motivate lawsuits to break open documents in discovery. You can't motivate, you know, voters to stampede on social media for reform unless they are charged up about the things that it has done wrong, because these things are always given a pretty name. Who's against international development? Who's against humanitarian assistance? So you do have to give it its moment. I mean, this is, and I come back to the Church Committee hearings. I mean, the iconic vision of that was Frank Church holding up a CIA heart attack gun.
Yeah.
And
can we pull that up? We mentioned it earlier.
And it's such an iconic image. You're like, okay, we were told that the CIA is there to protect us and to keep us safe.
What a shot.
And this thing is effectively a dart gun to murder someone, but then fool criminal forensics investigators so that it looks like the CIA didn't kill them. It looks like they died of a heart attack. You see that and you go, oh my God, my cousin died of a heart attack. Was he secretly? You have to break the halo on this in order. It doesn't mean every time someone dies of a heart attack, they were killed by the CIA. But what it means is you would not have the handcuffs. You know, the CIA didn't even have assassinations banned until the 1970s. There was no presidential finding requirement for the president to have to approve of covert action before this. And we are right now, we have the patient on the operating table. There is a Democratic mandate from the last election. There is a huge domestic groundswell, and then tons of foreign allies who have come out and said, thank God, USAID, you know, you've had governments that I think are allied with the Trump administration, from El Salvador to Poland to Hungary to even Mexico. The president of Mexico came out and supported the shutdown of USAID. And
Scheinbaum did?
Yeah. You can look up Scheinbaum, her comments on the closure of USAID, and because this thing had a halo wrapped around it for so long. Yes, you publicly supported the shutdown of USAID, right? And how much do we say we do there because we're supposed to be helping the people, but everyone knows what it is. At a certain point, if USAID is going to be an independent agency, it has to have its credibility. And there may come a day where the State Department rolls out another separate aid agency after putting it through the reforms. But you had 14,000 employees there under USAID, and you just look at something like the DRG side of USAID. That was the Bureau for Democracy, Rights, and Governance. That was a full-scale shop for for regime change. And USAID had an office called OTI, the Office of Transition Initiatives. And you can look up what the New York Times wrote about OTI. If you just type, I think 2014 New York Times Office of Transition Initiatives. That is a USAID full office dedicated to regime change.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.